Hi guys, so today I'm going to talk about exception handling in Spring Boot framework. So mainly I'm going to focus on response entity and control advisor. First, let's see how we can handle exception using control advisor. So I'm going to create a class and I'm going to name it custom exception handler. So first, I have to mark this class as control advice. Then I'm going to add method that going to handle IO exception. So it should be a public method. Then I'm going to add mark the return type as uh, response entity, and the type is object. Then I'm going to name this method as IO handler. Then I'm going to add a parameter. I'm going to add IO exception as a parameter. Right. Then I have to mark this method as exception handler, and I have to add IO exception as the value. So what we are doing is we are telling to Spring Boot that this method going to handle IO exception. So then I'm going to create a map string object body hash map. Then I'm going to put times stamp local date time now. Then I'm going to put message as dot get message. Then I'm going to return a new response entity, and going to add body, and then http status as internet server. So this is how we handle IO exception, or basically handle exception using a control advisor. Now let's change our this controller to throw exception. So what I'm going to do is, if uh, user DTO age is null, then I'm going to throw new file not found exception. So I'm doing this for demonstration purpose, but this is the right way of doing things. So I'm going to false file not found exception. So let's call this our endpoint and see whether this control advisor is working or not. So we are going to run our application. Okay, so let's call our endpoint. So I set the age as 12, so we shouldn't get any errors. See, we got our response. Let's remove age from the request. Here we got the internal server error, and we got the message as file not found and the timestamp. So that means our control advisor works, and this method got called because of that. So this is how you handle exception using control advisor. So same way you can add a handler method for SQL exception or other kind of exceptions. So this is the way we handle exception using control advice. Let's see how we can handle exception using response entity. So I created a method to update user. So i'm I'm getting this user id as a path variable. So what I'm going to do is, if we can find this user id in our database, we are going to update user, else we are going to throw an exception and then see how we can handle this exception using response entity. So I'm for this demo purpose, I'm not going to connect our application to a database. I'm just going to create a simple method that's check use id equal to 1 or else we are going to throw exception. So I'm going to create a private void is user exceeds, then string use id if use id equals 1, we are not going to do anything else. Throw user not found exception. Right. So let's create this exception class. So I'm going to create a package called exception. There I'm going to create this user not found exception. Then I'm going to extend this exception from runtime exception. So I'm going to add a constructor public string message super message. Then I'm going to annotate this exception as response status. So then let's import it here. Right. So then from here we are going to check for this method I. So I'm going to pass cannot find user from given id this id. Okay. So we created a custom exception and we annotated that exception using a response status annotation. So let's call this our new input. Right. Let's run our application. Then call our endpoint. So this is a put request. And have to add a path variable. So I'm going to path variable as 1 and second time. Right. So let's call this endpoint. Right. We got 200, and then we change this path variable to 2. So we got 500 internal server cannot find user for given ID too. So ideally this shouldn't be a 500 error. This should be a, for my understanding, this is a bad request. So because we are asking to update a user that doesn't exist in our system. So ideally the status should be 400. So we can change it from here. So response status bad request. Now let's run our application. Okay, let's call this endpoint. So as you can see, we got 400 bad requests and message as user cannot find user from given ID too. So this is how we handle exception, or handle our custom exception using response status annotation. So there we can mark the response status we are going to show to the front to the as a response. So this is how we handle exception in Spring Boot. So there are other ways. I'll add some links to description so that you guys can get idea about other ways. So thank you guys. See you guys on next video.